This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. Your support is invaluable to us, so smash that subscribe button like a fast bowler back of a length. Or you could leave a comment, something along the lines of, "Wow, Jared, you're one hell of a swinger." Furthermore, help us reach more people by sharing our work on social media, supporting us on Patreon, or sending live super chats. Celebrate your cricket heroes with Bodyline t-shirts. Explore their player-inspired tees, featuring legends like Sachin Tendulkar, Brian Lara, and Viv Richards. They also have team-inspired designs and options for hardcore cricket nerds. Their collection is a must-have for the true cricket enthusiast.
Hello and welcome to episode 47 of the Uncovered podcast. I'm Behram Kazi. You can find me at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, of course, as always, is Jared Kimber, who is literally everywhere. So, Jared, first up on our agenda today, Pakistan have risen to the top of the ODI rankings, and it's been quite the ascent for Babar and his boys. And I mean, I've been following Pakistan cricket since 2002, 2003. This seems like some sort of wet dream that I never thought, I'd get to see before. Because even though they've been consistent, Pakistan as the number one side in ODI cricket, the consistency hasn't been their strong suit. They're like that mercurial side that when they get galvanized, it brings the best out of them and they go on these runs. But they're always, somewhere around the middle or whatever. This is very, very new and it feels very alien. So what's your take on it?
I don't know how much I care about ODI rankings because I don't think, if you think since the last World Cup, we've had two T20 World Cups, right? And so what we haven't had of recent times is, so Ben Stokes, I don't think played an ODI for like a year and a half before he retired. We know he's in their best team because they picked him for this World Cup, right? Most of the better teams haven't been playing with their key 11s. So I do think from that perspective, it's hard to take the current ODI rankings. It's a bit more like the World Cup of basketball started 3 days ago, and Spain was ranked ahead of the USA, right? We see how many times do you see the football World Cup will start and America will be ranked like third or fourth, and like no one expects them to make the semifinals of the men's World Cup, right? So I do think there is now we've probably entered that period. Tell me how far back was it, Behram, when Pakistan lost to the England third 11?
It was 2021 maybe, if I'm not wrong, or maybe it was 2020. Might have been 2020 actually, but might have been the COVID year.
So there are still points. There are still points that. So from that series, some of those points would be in this ranking. If I remember the ODI rankings correctly, I think you get like half points. If it's more
incidentally, that is the last time Ben Stokes played ODI cricket.
It was, yeah. And he wasn't supposed to, was he? Like it was completely by accident. So I just think from that point of view, I think that sort of tells you something about this. Not to say that Pakistan hasn't played good cricket. I would say it'd be interesting to see what you thought of this. I don't know if there's a way of really working this out, but I would say that Pakistan's probably played more of their frontline players in ODI cricket than other teams have in that time. Is that something that you feel?
I think that they've definitely consistently played their best players. But then again, Pakistan have played 31 ODIs since the end of the 2019 World Cup to right now, which isn't a lot. If you look at all the ODIs that other nations have played, Pakistan's are like only ahead of like Afghanistan, which is quite a telling tale. And still they've managed to have a really good win rate. So I think that the skill set of Pakistan's players, it probably suits ODI cricket best. That's my take on it.
Well, I mean, you talk about them not playing a lot of games. That actually helps you play your main players, though, as well, doesn't it? Yeah. From that perspective, because if you look at it, so the West Indies have played 60, India have played 57. Then you've got UAE, Nepal, USA, PNG, Sri Lanka have played 47. So there's a lot of the associates have played a lot more, of course, of recent times. A lot of qualifying tournaments and everything else as well that they have to go through. So there is a lot there from that perspective, right? So if you are playing extra games, you're going to rest more players. Like India can't play 57 one-day internationals and play with their full-strength team the whole time. But I just having a look at those numbers. So Pakistan have played 31 games. They've won 22 and they've lost 8. So how many did they lose to England? Was it all 3?
All three. They also lost one to Zimbabwe, so that's four. And then recently they lost a series to New Zealand 2-1. So that's six. And then one against Australia, seven. And then there's one other loss in there somewhere, which I can't quite recall.
So their batting average is 37.5 in that time. The only team that is better is India, whose average is 39. And their runs per over is 5.7. So England is over a run of ball. India's been over a run of ball since the last World Cup. So India becomes the second team ever to be over a run of ball in a period between World Cups. South Africa are 5.91. Pakistan are way back at 5.7. So it's Pakistan, Australia, and New Zealand are more at those sort of slightly more defensive batting sorts of sides. And then there's a bit of a drop off to Sri Lanka and some of the others. But, batting wise, there's nothing particularly wrong with those numbers. But if you look at the bowling, where are we here? So their bowling average is 30, which is, I'm trying to think of who the teams that are better. So Sri Lanka's got a better bowling average. Australia's got a better bowling average. But Pakistan's up on New Zealand. Sorry, they're up on New Zealand, India, England, South Africa, which is the interesting one there, because South Africa has got 5 frontline bowlers and still don't manage to take any wickets. But Pakistan's also not as attacking as perhaps you would think. So it has been more of a combination of batting and bowling rather than just one or the other. Interestingly enough, the most expensive team in world cricket since that last World Cup is India, which might have something to do with the fact that they've scored a lot of runs as well. There might be a lot of flat pitches, but Pakistan their bowlers are going at 5.57. So they've been on the upper echelon of average, but not anything brutal. And their economy is 5.57, which is a bit more middle of the road. So England is 5.51, for instance. Australia's is down at 5.2. As one of the, as I think they might be the leader of the major teams other than Afghanistan. So, you get a bit of a look at that. There's nothing in those numbers that suggests that Pakistan is an outstanding. There's nothing in those numbers that suggests they should be 22-8 or whatever it is in that period. But there's nothing in those numbers also that suggests that they're not a very good team at the moment. But it's the rankings aren't what they once were. It used to be the old days. You used to turn up at a World Cup and South Africa and Australia would be number 1 and 2. And all the arguments about South Africa and everything you could make, essentially, those were the 2 best teams for, a spate of 12 years, whatever it was, 14 years. That isn't the case now. I think you could turn up now and you've got Pakistan and Australia are 1 and 2, whereas I think if you looked at the odds for this World Cup, India, who's ranked 3, and England, who's ranked 5, are probably going to be, the shortest teams in the World Cup. So I do think that has changed a little bit. Just the way that we look at those rankings. It's just, and we've had this with the T20 World Cup before as well, right? Like T20 World Cup turns up, and it doesn't really matter what the rankings are. So just to have a look. At the overall. So India's favorite, England is second favorite, and then Australia and Pakistan are, behind them. So, I think it's nice, and I think you'd rather be in a situation where you've won a bunch of ODIs coming in. But I do think that there are, other parts to that maybe don't stand it up as high.
Yeah, it's interesting, that comparison that you draw, with the, bettors market and whatever those odds are showing, and then also the rankings. And yeah, it's a very, very valid point. But if we look at Pakistan, you look at a team that historically, as Pakistan supporters, we were very accustomed or immune to Pakistan being 48 for 5, right? They weren't a very strong top order, but now you've got a top 3 that's very, very reliable. Sure, they might be striking at 5.7 overall in this period. But you've got Fakhar Zaman, who is, someone who averages more than 45 with the bat and strikes at over 90. And then Imamul Haq had a strike rate issue, has improved his strike rate, and is still averaging over 50, so 51.5, I believe. And then Babar Azam is arguably, the greatest batter in ODI cricket, in contemporary cricket. Of course, Virat Kohli is still playing, so don't come after me, Kohli fans. But if you look at the current statistics...
No, I think that's fair at the moment. If nothing else, he's probably the most consistent white ball scorer in the world, isn't he? Like right across both formats at the moment. And I think a lot of the issues that that some of us have with Pakistan's T20 side
Hmm.
actually in one-day cricket is more of a strength.
Yeah.
It's whether you can match that with upper echelon strike bowling, right?
Hmm.
And that's kind of the same in the T20 side, but that's essentially what they have to do. The difference is that if you have a team that could like 570, so 5.7 economy, so you're looking around a pass score of what 280, 285, something like that. If you do that with bowlers who were taking a wickets at an average of 30, right? You're now getting to the point you chuck in a couple of runouts there, and things are a little bit interesting from that perspective. The math starts to work out a little bit better, right? So I think that I feel more comfortable. I think the balancing act they play in T20 cricket really depends on the bowlers being outstanding. I don't think that's the case in T20 in one day as much. The difference is, though, as we talked about, at 5.7 scoring rate, and this is going to the same for Australia and New Zealand. All three of those teams have the same issue, which is if India and England can score at 0.4 runs and over quicker, right? That's a lot.
Yeah.
And so if those other teams can get away from them, it's going to be very hard for Pakistan, Australia, and New Zealand to ever be able to replicate that. But what Pakistan do and what Australia do is that they believe that they can attack and take enough wickets to nullify. Where I think Australia traditionally against England in limited overs cricket since 2015 has struggled is that they still play it like a normal one-dayer. And I've seen that with Pakistan as well. If you want to beat England specifically, but even India as well, you really have to take 7 or 8 wickets, and really get deep into that order. And with England, you probably have to bowl them out. And I think that hasn't happened as much. But, I think if you throw New Zealand, and we don't think New Zealand's going to be as strong, but we know that they're a good tournament team, and you throw South Africa in there. Those are the 6 teams playing for the semi-finals with obviously, whatever is going to happen with Bangladesh is going to happen with Bangladesh. But, those are the sort of the main. So if you're going to tier them, I would have Pakistan. I might have India and England in tier 1, but I might have Australia and Pakistan in tier 2. I would have perhaps South Africa in tier 3, and then I would have maybe New Zealand and Bangladesh and maybe Sri Lanka as well in that sort of that 4th tier, right? But all of those teams have a reasonable chance of making a semi-final, and a couple of and you would say anyone in tier 1 and 2 has a reasonable chance of winning the tournament, even if it's not, even if it seems like India and England are more heavily favoured than the other two.
Right. And you mentioned that Pakistan's bowlers are, striking at an average of 30. But if you look at the pace attack in particular, right, their average comes down to like 26, 27, and they have been the best numbers wise in this period since the 2019 World Cup to now. And you've got a lot of variety in there. Shaheen is a great new ball bowler. Some would say the best in contemporary cricket. And Naseem Shah has that all phase capability with the new ball, with the old ball, is dead accurate and, has a killer Yorker, can reverse it. That's another plus with him. And then Haris Rauf is express pace, great first change bowler, can also at times bowl with a new ball, but at the death is where he's really, really good. So when I look at these 3 paces, working in tandem, and we all know that fast bowlers hunt in packs, how do you see them stack up against other pace bowling attacks in world cricket right now?
Yeah, I
I mean, you've
suppose.
got your Bumrah, Siraj, and Shami, even though Bumrah's just back from injury, but those guys are around. And then, of course, the South African boys are around. And Australia still have Mitch Starc, who is an ODI GOAT, right? So
Yeah.
there are a few
No. I
competitors.
think it's good. My issue is who's the best spinner for Pakistan,
Yeah, that is an issue because you've
right?
got Nawaz and Shadab, who are good spinners, but they're adding more value as all rounders. So it's not like
Exactly.
a out and out, world class spinner. Even though Shadab can be that person on certain days, but he's not, say, a Rashid Khan, right?
Well, Shadab's average is what 32 in one-day cricket, but I think he struggles a lot more perhaps in the middle overs and of recent times. Even though he's a wrist spinner, he actually probably has more of a finger spinner's record in some ways. I worry about that in a tournament that's in India, in the same way that I worry about New Zealand being able to take wickets in the middle overs, and if Adil Rashid is too slow for Indian pitches. All these
Mm,
there are a few teams that might have some major issues of the ability to take wickets in that center area. So I don't think the Pakistan seamers are the problem. It's that they don't have a Zampa, right?
mm,
Which is funny because Zampa isn't the most popular Australian cricketer, and I think I had a question on Wagon Wheel the other day going, Nathan Lyon should be in ahead of Zampa, but you look at Zampa and he's a very good strike wicket taker. And he
mm,
doesn't take them in the way that Adil Rashid or Imran Tahir did. And it's not as sexy. And like, I understand all of that, but he does take very good, consistent wickets. And you feel when you're watching him bowl that there is a chance he will take a wicket, even if he is,
mm,
I don't think he's as good a bowler as Shadab overall.
mm,
If you were getting me to pick between the two on purely on talent, I wouldn't say that, he's a better bowler. And yet, despite the fact he's played in Australian conditions, I think he averages 3 or 4 better, maybe
mm,
5 or 6. I can't remember what it is, but so that's the issue, because again, it comes back. You're right with the seam bowlers, but it is in India, and so you have to factor that part in. And then the other thing that you have to factor in is if you're only going to be making 280 to 300,
mm,
scores, you have to be able to strike in that middle period. I don't think you can allow teams to get away. Now, maybe they rotate the seamers through more and they find a way. Maybe Shadab or who's the other guy? The bloke who had the
Mohammad
terrible,
Nawaz.
yeah, Nawaz. Maybe one of them bowls some up front because it is in India, and so
Mm,
you do that, which allows you to stagger your seam bowlers a little bit more throughout the innings, which means that perhaps you always have one seam bowler bowling, all the way through. But yeah, it's not ideal. But either way, they've got good form behind them. I would say one thing about the Pakistan team that I like compared to most other teams in the world is because they have been playing their best players,
mm,
and South Africa might be another example of this. Everyone kind of exactly knows their role. And we've seen with Australia that you can win a World Cup without that. We had that in the UAE, right, where just sort of came together at the last minute and they were very talented. But there is an
mm.
advantage to, knowing exactly what you're going to do before you go into that tournament.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the well gelled side, and Babar, the tactician, comes under scrutiny every now and then. But Babar, the leader, has done really well in terms of building a cohesive unit and all bringing all of these guys together. And Pakistan teams of yesteryear have had infighting, have had controversy. We haven't seen that with this team, so at least that's a plus. And they've highlighted that, especially in the team talks as well. Plus, it's weird how over the past couple of months they've been a brilliant fielding side,
Hmm.
and this generally tends to happen when Mickey Arthur comes around. Last time when he was, Pakistan coach and Steve Rickson was fielding coach, Pakistan experienced one of their most purple patches as a fielding team, and they're going through something similar right now. But what I want to talk about is the value that their batting depth adds, because all of those guys can hit sixes right down till the end. Shaheen is a slogger,
Hmm.
Haris Rauf can hit a six, and Naseem is versatile. He can, dead bat, he can take the game deep, and he can hit sixes. So I think that is an area where Pakistan, at least in my opinion, have a bit of an edge.
I think that Australia has for many years believed that having Pat Cummins and Mitchell Starc down the order helps them in a similar
Mm,
way. I can't think of many situations where you're facing Rabada or Adil Rashid or, Bumrah, where those guys are really of any use. So I get it. And I think in a T20 tournament, a T20 franchise kind of thing,
mm,
or a T20 situation where a couple of hits matters, I think I understand that point of view. I don't know if I'd be factoring that in as much with Pakistan. It's just because I don't really like Shaheen's. He can hit a couple of sixes. He's not going to get you 30 off 30 in on a tricky pitch when the best bowlers in the world are bowling. Most probably, he might be able to hit 30 off 12.
mm,
Okay, once every 30 innings or something like that. So yeah, I understand. I just not the way that I would worry about those sorts of things. What if they were using it properly? Right.
mm,
So if they were getting to a point where they were really attacking through the middle, their batters start to attack, and then every tail ender's job is to go out there and try and hit 12 off 3 balls, in the last couple of overs. That would be fine. But having watched Pakistan cricket, I just don't think they're going to do it in that kind of way. And because of that, I don't think they'll get the most out of it. But also, it really is. It's just once you get to that sort of level of cricket, the ability to consistently hit sixes off the best bowlers in the world is not the same as it is doing it, in this slightly easier cricket. Like, put it this way, Shaheen, Obed McCoy, Mitch McClenaghan back in the day, Ben Hilfenhaus, all those guys can probably hit you a six very early on in their innings. But in one-day cricket, you kind of need a bit more than that. It's just longer, right? In T20 cricket, that would be a bigger advantage. But in one-day cricket, I'm not sure I'd be as worried about it, just because, watching Australia for years have a similar kind of lineup and get almost nothing extra out of it, right? Like when they have Agar at number 7, Australia just looks really thin as a team, despite the fact you have Stark and you have Cummins. You might even have Kane Richardson or whoever else down the order. It just doesn't really work in one-day cricket in the same way. It's the same as it doesn't in Test cricket. Realistically, if you don't have a strong top 7 in Test cricket, then having a strong number 8 and number 9 doesn't do anything. If you have a very strong top 7, then having Mitchell Stark or Graham Swan is much handier down the order.
Yeah, well, I'll challenge you on that. We'll see, and I think that it
name a World Cup.
Pakistan.
Name a World Cup that a team had, because the most famous one is South Africa, right? Which had a bunch of, they could bat down to number 9, 10, and 11, and it didn't do them any good. You don't win World Cups with your lower order, right? You might win a game or two, don't get me wrong, but you don't win the World Cup with it. But I understand why people look at it and like it, but I would have to see it work consistently. You win World Cups with essentially 2 things. You win World Cups with probably your top 4, right? And then you win them with strike bowlers, right? Who can do those 2 things, or at the very least, a very great defensive bowling attack where you have 5 great bowlers. It's very rare to have those things, but those are the things that win World Cups.
All right, so final question on this. Do you think that this is Pakistan's best ODI outfit since 1999 or maybe 2003, even though those guys were old then? And do you think they can potentially lift a trophy in the next 3 months, because they're playing 2 big tournaments?
Yeah, 99 was pretty good, wasn't it? Did they beat Australia in the early rounds in 99?
Yeah.
I think they did, didn't
And
I? I know
then
Australia wasn't
went on a 30-something game run, after which Pakistan beat them again in 2011.
2003, they should have beaten Australia as well. Andrew Simons obviously came in and messed that game up for them. Yeah, I think they're probably better in 99, weren't they? Yeah, I suppose if you look at white ball, so one-day cricket, I think they've had some pretty good T20 sides in between. But if you're looking specifically at one-day cricket, I thought the 99 team, most of the Pakistan probably underperformed in the 90s. They probably should have won either 96 or the 99 World Cup. And then they ran into Australia and it was kind of over. As you said, they got old as well. But they really did probably underperform. That they surprised everyone in 92. But if you look at the talent that they had available to them, especially, with the ball, so many spinners, you chuck one of their spinners from the 90s into this team now and they'd be favorites.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So,
absolutely.
I do think from that perspective, things have changed quite a bit. But yeah, I think the 99 side was incredible. So I think it's probably fair to say that was, I would have to see this team play all the way through a World Cup, because I do feel that, it wasn't that long ago we saw them lose to Zimbabwe. So I have to see them play all the way through the World Cup to really feel comfortable saying they're better than the 99 team. But I think they're in that ballpark.
I wouldn't say they're better, because that team had some out-and-out superstars in Wasim, and Waqar wasn't even playing as a starter in that World Cup. So that goes on to tell you a story. But I think in the last 2 decades, I would say I feel pretty confident saying that they might be the best ODI outfit that Pakistan have had. Anyway, we'll take a short break over here. You guys are listening to Uncovered with Behram and Jared, and we'll see you in a bit with some more Pakistan news. Afghanistan-Pakistan series is up next.
I knew you'd say that, and I knew you'd say that before I could remember what window I had everything in. Oh, wait, what are we in? Oh, there we are. Now I will play the ad, which I had ready to go. I just couldn't find it. This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. Your support is invaluable to us, so smash that subscribe button like a fast bowler back of a length. Or you could leave a comment, something along the lines of, "Wow, Jared, you're one hell of a swinger." Furthermore, help us reach more people by sharing our work on social media, supporting us on Patreon, or sending live super chats. Celebrate your cricket heroes with Bodyline t-shirts. Explore their player-inspired tees, featuring legends like Sachin Tendulkar, Brian Lara, and Viv Richards. They also have team-inspired designs and options for hardcore cricket nerds. Their collection is a must-have for the true cricket enthusiast.
You're back. You're watching Uncovered. Welcome back. Of course, I'm Behram Kazi, and with me is Jared Kimber. And let's move on to the Afghanistan versus Pakistan series, Jared. And the first thing I want to talk about is Fazalak Farooqi pulled off a bunked, and not Sarfaraz. Shadab Khan was batting at 48, had rescued Pakistan from a very precarious situation. Pakistan were 8 down, required 11 off the final over. Shadab had just hit like a 4 and a 6 to bring them close and had batted really well. And then that happened. And Shadab didn't look back, walked straight off. And Pakistan ultimately won the game in dramatic fashion. But, we saw that there was some dissent shown by their players. And here's what I want to talk to you about. Now, we've obviously done a lot of work on the Munkad. You guys can go watch like the Footmarks podcast we've done on it, and it keeps on coming in our work. But you look at a few teams who have never attempted it. Of course, England are there. And then Bangladesh, Ireland, Pakistan, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. So all of these cricket playing nations have never attempted the bunker. Do you think that this might be one of those things where half of the teams are over that line and the other half are like still in that whole spirit of cricket debate?
Well, I think that, and this is why the spirit of cricket is nonsense, right? Because everyone has a different kind of spirit of cricket. Like, there are certainly parts of English cricket where you are supposed to clap the batter when he comes into bat, right? Like, that's such a weird way of doing things. And
that's like Americans clapping when the plane lands. It happens.
It's a bit like that, yeah. And in Australia, there's a lot of people who don't walk just because they don't walk, right? But there's a lot of people that I played with who are very clear with why they don't walk. It's because it's the umpire's decision. It's the umpire's job to give a decision, and you are not respecting the umpire if you are just making your own decisions, right? And he's going to make one decision that's in your favor, and he's going to make one that's against you. So everyone has these different ideas of who to respect and how to respect them, and I think that plays out in individual countries, right? What I would say is that Ireland happily ran out Kagisa Rabada when he was when he shouldn't have been given out. The umpires made the error, not Ireland. But with that no ball, and they probably knew, in the spirit of that moment, not in the spirit of the moment, in that moment, that what they were doing was not 100% legal, although fair play to them for trying to get away with it. So I do think from that perspective that there are different countries who do look at these things slightly differently. But perhaps there's also, you need a player who can do it. Like if you go back to that Mankad video we did, Vinod Mankad is one, but Thomas Barker, Murali Kartik, the old New Zealand guy,
Bill Henley,
Maeve, who was the
Dumo?
Uganda? Yeah,
something like that.
There's a bunch of players who've done it. Charlie Griffiths. There's a bunch of players who did it multiple times. So it seems to be if you don't have a player from your country who's keen on it, you don't do it, right? The Chappells, the whole Chappell family, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's as clear as an individual country. I think it really is more to do with players specifically who, if you have players from a country who are into it, they will do it. And if you don't, you don't. But there is certainly your general point, I think, is also true. I think there are certainly cricket cultures where it's completely frowned upon, and there are other cricket cultures where that's not the case.
It's interesting you mentioned the whole, rather than it being a country thing, it's a players thing. Because I remember Cricket Australia did like a short little video segment in which they asked their players about it, is it right? Is it wrong? And it was like a split. Half of them said it's fine. Half of them said, no, it's against the spirit of cricket or whatever. And even in this game, like in the aftermath, when they spoke to Shadab about it, he was like, yeah, I was wrong. I should have been in my crease, and it's within the laws of the game, and so it's permissible. But you look at some of his teammates, and they were really riled up. And one of those guys was Naseem Shah, and this guy has somewhat built his own personal legend versus Afghanistan. Last year in the Asia Cup, he smacked those 2 sixes to win Pakistan that very, very crucial game in dramatic fashion. And in this one as well, in that final over, after Shadab was out and munkaded by Fazalak Farooqi. Once again, against Fazalak Farooqi, same bowler, Naseem hits an inside-out 4 over the covers, aerial, and then edges one off the last delivery for 4 and goes absolutely berserk, completely loses his shit. Like, in a state of euphoria, chest out, throws his bats, gloves, and everything, and he's pumped, right?
Mm.
Also went on to have an emotional moment where he was like he wished that his mother was alive to witness it. But it's interesting how he has the wood over Afghanistan now, and sport gives us these wonderful little um subplots. And yeah, I mean, I saw a tweet in which they said that, oh, it's an empty stadium, and this just looks poor. This is what we play the game for, no?
Yeah. I mean, I think the whole Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Pakistan triangle is getting really interesting because there is, I remember when I didn't realize at the start that I think it might have been the 2015 World Cup when you realized how much the Bangladesh fans hated the Afghanistani team, right? And they've managed to keep that up, that rivalry between the two. Whereas I think there's a lot of Bangladeshi fans who believe that Afghanistan get a lot of credit that Bangladesh never got when they were coming through, not as much hype, all this sort of stuff, which isn't really true. If you go back to the start of Bangladesh, people were really excited about them every time. When Ashraful came through, everyone was really excited. When Tamim made his hundreds at Lord, everyone was really excited. But they still haven't got the level of Bangladesh, of Afghanistan, right? No team's ever had as much, PR as Afghanistan. And then, of course,
exposure as well, with respect to when they were an associate nation with their players going and playing leagues. They've had that exposure, right?
No, exactly. But that wasn't around when Bangladesh came through either. But then on the other side of it, you have this Afghanistan-Pakistan thing of, there were Afghanistan players who qualified to play for Pakistan and could have played for Pakistan. A lot, very, very close speak. A lot of them speak the same first language, right? All these different things. They all live together in the UAE. All these different things that happen. So there's this weird sort of triumvirate of that. I don't think standard cricket fans know that there's animosity between these teams and there's budding rivalries coming up between these teams. And if I was the ICC,
add the Sri Lanka Bangladesh rivalry to that as well. That's a hot one.
Well, Sri Lanka Bangladesh is another really good one. So you have is it grudge round or rivalry round? I think they have in some of the other sports, right? Where you actually that's what you do. You play that up. The World Cup now has enough different teams that you could do something along those lines with, right? So South Africa, New Zealand would be an interesting one in a World Cup because of New Zealand sending South Africa out of a couple of World Cups, right? Bangladesh have a couple of different rivals, right? India, Pakistan is an obvious one, but then you have Afghanistan, Bangladesh. But you could have different rivalries in different years. So you could take the India-Pakistan game out of the rivalry week, right? You could move that to another one, and you'd still have India-Australia is a perfectly good rivalry, right?
True.
So there's all these little subplots that I think are happening. If the game was run a little bit better, we could have a lot more of them. But you see it in this Afghanistan. I mean, I didn't watch a great amount of the cricket, but you could see that there's the best way of putting it is that that famous Australian phrase of needle. There's just that little bit of needle in this series. This isn't just two cricket teams playing each other. There's just a little bit going on beneath the surface, and the man cat obviously helped with that as well. But there is a little bit. There are words being shared. Not everyone's happy. I don't think Pakistan's particularly happy at losing. Did they lose a series?
They lost a T20 series versus Afghanistan, but they've never lost an ODI. Although they've come close to losing an ODI, and that's I think that's why these victories are sweeter when they come close and then still win. And Pakistan does have that edge over Afghanistan, but it's only a matter of time, right? That it goes the other way.
They lost the T20 series this year, didn't they? Was that the one where they got bowled out for 90?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
So there's something there, right? And I think that it's a really important thing. And if I was running Pakistan cricket, which no one is, as we both know at the moment, but if I was running Pakistan cricket,
someone new is every other week.
Yeah. This is one of the things I'd be looking at, right? Which is, how do we get to a point where we are capitalizing on this, right? If there is something there, right? And you can start to build the animosity and everything else. And it can be fun. It doesn't have to be, well, even India, Pakistan's not particularly a toxic relationship, but it doesn't have to be a toxic relationship between those two. I meant cricket-wise, between the Indian and Pakistani cricketers, not the politics. But you know what I mean? You can build this up, and it can be something. And I really think that is in a it's a really, really important thing for cricket. And if I'm running Pakistan cricket, other than the PSL, which I'd be investing all my money in, this is the other thing I'd be doing, right? Getting a key rivalry with Bangladesh, right? I'd be getting Bangladesh players on my TV coverage, right? That sort of, think of the great Channel 9 days, right? Tony Gregg plays a part in everything that happens on Channel 9 because he is this dissenting voice in the box, ready to make fun of everyone when they're talking about how great all their players are and everything else. Those sorts of things don't exist anymore, right? And I remember when South Africa were really good and they toured Australia, and Ian Healy said, Dale Steyn, he's the James Pattinson of the South African team, right? The reason he could say that is no one was talking about South Africa. Whereas actually, the way you market that tournament is the world's best bowler is coming to beat us.
Yeah.
Right? That's how you should be marketing that tournament. And cricket doesn't do that. And I think within that sort of stuff, that is where, because there are these burgeoning, and look, these things disappear. So what happens is now, Pakistan and Afghanistan don't like each other particularly a lot at the moment. Afghanistan won that other tournament. Pakistan have had the Mankad and everything has happened. There's a little bit of needle there. That disappears when they all start playing in T20 leagues together. Or that disappears when a crop of players retire, right? Or that disappears just naturally. All these things happen, right? Don't let that happen. You can market that for the next 30 years, right?
Yeah.
We want to beat them. And here's why we want to beat them, right? And I think those things are far more important. And the only country I've seen do that well, and they only really do it for Australia, is India. India is really good at marketing the Australia-India series as we have to beat Australia, right? They're coming for us. The whole Bully the Bully campaign was a stupid title, and they should never have used it. But the general principle behind that made a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
And cricket doesn't do any of this. Right? It
It's
shouldn't be the case that you have, if you're a neutral fan, and that's the people on this channel, neutral fans, right? If you're a neutral fan, and I don't mean that as in they don't support their own team, but they like cricket as a whole. When you go into the World Cup, you want to know that Afghanistan and Bangladesh hate each other because that game's going to be on the TV and you want to be drawn into that game. If no one's told you that, why would you know that? They're not next to each other on the map. There's no reason for that. As I said, I stumbled into it by talking to a bunch of Bangladesh fans. But this is the most important game of 2015 World Cup for us. I was like, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, India does do that whole thing. Like they market these things really well. But sometimes, they will take it over the top and then, it gets a bit ugly. But then again, I'm saying that you can do that, market your games, build up the hype, build up the rivalries. And then post-game, you can have some feel-good content as well. So have some wholesome content once the game is over.
Yeah.
Hit that sweet spot, both
you have to be careful, I think, from the national identity, because there are people in India who hate Sri Lankans and hate Bangladeshis and hate Pakistanis, and the same in Australia of different hate Indians and they hate South Africans or whatever it may be, right? And we're talking about racial, we're talking about politics, whatever, right? You do have to be careful. That doesn't mean that you don't hype up the opposition and that you don't hype up the matchup of this is what happened last time. And if you look at the ICC, they've never been particularly good at that. And the broadcasters don't care, right?
Yeah.
The broadcasters generally are just going to hype up their local games. If you want this to work as a tournament, it has to be more than that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll definitely have a fair few of those rivalries in this World Cup and Asia Cup as well. Just one last question on this topic. We saw some good batting on display in patches in this series. Rahmanullah Gurbaz from Afghanistan scored 151 in the second ODI. He was the reason Afghanistan came so close to victory. And he's got 5 tons in 24 ODIs, which I think is quite ridiculous. So how well does that augur for Afghanistan? And also, Imam ul Haq, top scored for Pakistan, bagged the Man of the Series award, averages 51.5 in ODI cricket. Do you think he is the most underrated ODI batter maybe in world cricket right now? Or is it like someone like Rassi van der Dusen?
I think they're both probably aptly rated. So, I mean, averaging 51, I'm going to say 21 then, is great. He does it with a strike rate of 82, right? If he's doing it with a strike rate of 95 or 105, there would be a lot more hype on him. If you're doing it with a strike rate of 82, the global strike rate at the moment is somewhere around 90 or 91. So he's a lot slower than the global average, right?
Yeah.
And it's not Shy Hope levels of slow, but it's not far off Shy Hope, right? And
But
if
you've
you
got to
bat,
consider the fact that it's like a career in phases, right? And if you look at the last couple of years, then that strike rate would go up. So
yeah,
you
but
see
you also
improvement.
said his career average was 51. So you are talking about
True.
career, right?
Yeah.
Look, my point is, if you're averaging 51, my first thing is to look at the strike rate,
Hmm.
right? And I think at that point, it is fair to say that he is not striking at a rate that is particularly game changing, right? Now,
True.
it does play into that thing we were talking about with Pakistan before, so I don't have
Hmm.
any issue there. With Gabars, he hasn't made many runs in ODI cricket yet, right? Like
Hmm.
I think he's made. Oh god, I was looking this up the other day. I think he's
Well,
made
if he
like
scored 5 tons, there's 500 of those.
yeah. I think I'm right in saying he's still not scored 1,000 runs in ODI cricket, or maybe he just went past in a recent game.
Right.
I think if you look at his, there's a lot of hype about what he can do, obviously in T20 cricket, and he hasn't found a way to match the two up. And so far, when he's played well in one day cricket, he's made 100, and when he hasn't played well in one day cricket, he hasn't got anything. And he again, if I'm remembering his numbers right, was probably a little bit slower than he needs to be.
Hmm.
From that perspective, for him, I think his ideal one day record is probably going to be averaging 35 with a
Hmm.
strike rate of 110. The problem is that what Afghanistan needs is him to average 45 or 50 with a strike
Hmm.
rate of 80. He needs to be Imam, right? And the reason he needs to be Imam is they have never found consistent scorers. And if Afghanistan is ever going to be a threat in one day cricket, they need to be able to score 250 to 300 regularly. And they just have never had the top. To go back to your thing before about, Pakistan's lower order, Afghanistan's always had lower order players who can hit the ball and hit sixes, but they don't match it with the top order. And if you don't match it with the top order, it fades away so quickly. So I do think from that perspective, that's why he's really, really important to them going ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll continue with Afghanistan because once we're back from this break, we'll be doing a little Asia Cup preview. But till then, you're watching the Uncovered podcast with Behram and Jared. We'll see you shortly after this ad, which Jared will be playing right now.
Picture this. You
Climate.
made a video and now you want the world to see it in their favorite social media platform. You could bowl into the wind by slaving away making edits, or you could let Memento effortlessly cut those epic moments down, making them perfect for your social media followers. It's like having a runner. You play the shot and they do all the hard work. Sync up your podcast and YouTube and they will be the substitute fielder who does all of the work. With Memento, you can craft a long innings down to the best highlights. Make your content, but let Memento cut it. Dive into even more cricket with our other show, Jared Kimber Podcast. Join us 4 times a week for live recordings and fascinating conversations. Discover Wagon Wheel, Uncovered, Footmarks, and Red Inker. Shows that cover fan questions, weekend highlights, articles, videos, and thought-provoking discussions. Be part of our entire cricketing community.
Welcome back to Uncovered. You've got Behram Kazi with you. You can find me at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, of course, is Jared. And we're going to preview the Asia Cup. So, Jared, we've talked about Pakistan enough. We don't need to go there. Let's go to the other teams. We were talking about Afghanistan. And of course, we all know that they have arguably the best spin attack in world cricket. It's absolutely world class. You've got Rashid Khan, who is, one could argue the best limited overs spinner in contemporary cricket. With him, you've got Mujib, who is a brilliant new ball bowler as well. And as we recently saw, he can also whack it for a few. Got the quickest 50 for Afghanistan in ODI cricket. Then you've got Nabi's experience and you've got Noor on the bench. So for spin, they're sorted, right? For pace, they have Fazal Haq Farooqi, who's decent with the new ball. He provides that left arm dimension, but they don't really have any other pacer. They do have Naveenul Haq, but there's some controversy going over there because he's not selected for the Asia Cup. And Azmatullah Omarzai, another guy who played the PSL as well, is injured. So how do you see their bowling attack, stack up against one of the, some of the big batting teams in this Asia Cup that's coming up?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is if they don't take a phenomenal amount of wickets, what happens at the death, right? So we know that Rashid Khan can bowl a little bit at the death, but also we've seen him go at times. When he's bowling on a favorable surface, I think it's absolutely fine. They're so interesting because they burst onto the scene with seam bowlers, right? And when we first heard about them, you had the mini Zadrans,
Shapur Zadran.
Daulat Zadran, and they,
Hamid Hassan. Hamid Hassan was another good one.
well, he's that, so you had three guys who could bowl 88 miles an hour plus in
Hmm.
associate cricket, which had never existed before, right? That's just,
Hmm.
we never had, I don't think of any cricket team in the world outside of perhaps West Indies who started with legitimate fast bowling, right?
Hmm.
Generally, you start with medium fast and then you move your way up. You eventually find your Boyd Rankin, um, you
Hmm.
know, or your Josh Little, but it takes a while, right? Look at Bangladesh, and it's that's always been the case all the way through, and they started with that, but really they haven't been able to keep that seam bowling around, right? Like they just
Hmm.
haven't been able to keep it at that level. And I think that again, it just shows that we talk about their top order batting, we talk about the seam bowling. They've always got holes in their
Hmm.
side, which I think just makes them a good spoiler team at the moment. And I think that's where they are. They have the ability to beat the best teams because they have
Hmm.
so many players who are so good at what they do, but they don't have the ability to be consistently good in tournament play because they just aren't as well rounded as the more experienced teams.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a very fair assessment because, we spoke about the spinners. They've got a good pacer or two, here and there, but obviously not a consistently good pace attack. And then, you've got players in the top three. You've got your Gurbaz. Ibrahim Zadran has been a really good accumulator for them, 800 plus runs and 17 odd ODIs. We've even spoken about him on the Uncovered podcast in the past. And then Rahmat Shah is, someone who can accumulate runs but has a strike rate issue. But then again, so many holes, particularly in the middle order as well, and
Yeah.
have that bit of volatility as well as a batting side. So, yeah, I would say you're right when you say it's a great spoiler team, and they still have some way when it comes to, actually posing a threat in tournaments. Anyway, let's talk about the big boys, India. We can talk a lot about what's good about India. There's so much that's going their way. Of course, Rohit Sharma, Shubman Gill, Virat Kohli. You've got Bumrah back, Shami Siraj, Kuldeep, lots of good players. But we've talked about their middle order woes earlier in a podcast, and we've talked about the wicket keeping conundrum as well. Ishan, KL Rahul. So there are a few questions that India needs to answer, and also what sort of spin attack and what sort of spin combination they are to play, and whether or not they're going to go with that extra batter or not. Lots of questions with respect to India. They don't have like a finalized 11 at all. And do you think that will hold them back in this Asia Cup?
If I was India, I wouldn't be trying to win the Asia Cup.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if I
Fair
was
enough.
Pakistan, I would be either, although maybe it's slightly different in Pakistan's case. I think it's really interesting that they took Sanju Samson as a reserve
Reserve player.
when
Yeah.
you've been talking about the wicket keeping issue.
Hmm.
I think that's a fascinating situation to be in. But yeah, if I was them, I would be just experimenting. If we win the
Hmm.
tournament, we win the tournament. But what is the best lineup that we have available to us at the moment?
Hmm.
Is Prashid Krishna a more likely to take wickets while striking than Mohammad Siraj is, for instance?
Hmm.
Is Shardul Thakur, being that we're not going to get much out of his batting anyway in white ball cricket, is there any point having him in the side over a genuine specialist, bowler in that way? Does Jadeja and Akshar Patel actually work?
Hmm.
If one of them, or is there are there other ways of using them that they
Hmm.
haven't quite thought of at the moment. So I think there's quite a few questions
Yeah.
from that perspective on it. But yeah, I wouldn't be worried about winning. I I know that the Asia Cup has become a decently important team to a lot of Asian
Hmm.
cricket fans, but it's right before a World Cup. This is nothing. This is a warm up tournament, right?
Yeah.
Like that's all this is. There are probably going to be times when the Asia Cup's going to be more important, right? When it's on
Hmm.
its own. But I think for a lot of Asian cricket fans, there's this thought that it'll eventually become like the Euros,
Hmm.
in football. And I can see that, right? I can understand why that might be the case. But if the Euros were being played 5 minutes before a World Cup, I wouldn't be telling any of the European teams to do anything other than experiment to get themselves in the best place for the World Cup, and that's what I think India should be doing.
That's really true, actually, that having the Asia Cup right before the World Cup kind of takes the sheen off the
Yeah,
tournament itself. And even though it could be something bigger on its own, a lot of big teams might be just taking this as practice. And if India do experiment, they could answer a lot of those questions that are pending right now. And maybe, who knows, we might see Yuzvendra Chahal back in the team, right? You did mention that Shardul could lose his spot, or what value he really adds in this sort of a World Cup year in their ODI team. But along those same lines of experimentation, Jasprit Bumrah came back after a year-long injury, and you have to wrap him up in cotton wool. He's just that important to India's bowling attack.
Hmm.
Do you use him cautiously in the Asia Cup, or do you give him game time? Where are you going with this?
That would just be 100% on how he goes, right? Like
Hmm.
of how comfortable he is. You're just having conversations with him, right? And you're just saying, are you in a situation where you think you need to bowl more or less? Obviously, they'll be tracking him with physios and coaching staff and everything else. But if you say to him, what do you think you need to put yourself in the best position, and then you do that. So if he says, look, I played a couple of games in Ireland, I probably need to play 3 games, but at the end of those 3 games, is it okay if that's all I do? Then I think that's absolutely fine. You just try and get him in a situation where he's of the most use to you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to Srish Shah from Cricinfo, and he was of the opinion that you play him as much as you can because you need to get him like match ready for the World Cup. So it's interesting because
Yeah, well, he might need that, but he might want the opposite, right? So
Yeah.
you can't. We don't know what he's going to need. Really, he's going to know that. And he might say, "Look, ball's coming out fine. Give me a couple. Let me tick." Some guys like to tick it over, right? So they just like to know that it's working, and then they pull back. And then other guys, you have that sort of Glenn McGrath, Courtney Walsh sort of thing of like, I'll play in every warm up. I'll play as much as I can because this is what I do.
Yeah, but it's interesting because from a fast bowler's perspective, and I say this from an Indian and Pakistani perspective, because those are the two pace bowling attacks that they would want to really, really preserve, right? Because Bangladesh show Taskeen is express or getting there, but Ibadat's not around. Ebadot, your favorite, and Mustafizur is, well, a different kind of bowler. So I would want these teams to kind of go about it wisely, because even if these are somewhat important tournaments, it's going to be played under excruciatingly hot conditions, so you've got to keep that in mind as well. But anyway, it's interesting how the format of the Asia Cup, it's so capitalistic in its nature that you've literally pitted India and Pakistan in a group with a weaker team, so that you have every opportunity of getting these two teams promoted into the Super 4 stage, so that you can potentially get 3 games out of them if both those teams make the final. So they're
But
really
it's not just that.
churning out the money.
It's really a weird tournament when you think about it, because it's T20 and then it's one day, right? The Asia Cup isn't even like, I'm trying to think a bit, when it would be like having a rugby tournament that sometimes is a full rugby and sometimes is rugby sevens, right? It's such a bizarre concept, right? And I know there's more overlap between T20 cricket and ODI cricket than there is between rugby and rugby sevens, but you get my point, right? Like it's such a weird thing to be like even before. So I said we'll do the preview on this, and I was like, wait a minute, is it T20 or one day this time? I assumed it would be one day because the World Cup's coming up and they're using it in that way. But I wasn't sure because I hadn't really been factoring that in. I'll probably watch more of it now, especially because it is one day and because it's going to be in Asia. This is a brilliant warm-up tournament, right? Because in some ways, and I don't know if this was done on purpose, but if it was, kudos to the people who did it. But it's actually screwed over all the non-Asian teams, right?
Yeah, in a
Because
way.
they can't warm up in Asia properly for this World Cup because all the Asian teams are busy warming up themselves, right?
That's actually a fantastic point. Yeah.
So it's a really cool little thing, and I would say it happened by accident, although hopefully it didn't. I always want as much nefarious action as possible, but it really is. From that point of view, it's a really, really interesting tournament, and those teams are going to know more about themselves for the World Cup than England, India, England, New Zealand, and Ireland playing in the UK.
Yeah. It's also interesting because, the Asia Cup doesn't have a regular cadence. It's always random. There'll be 4 years you won't have it, and then you're having it 2 years in a row. So it's weird like that. But anyway, India and Pakistan are probably going to be, qualifying for the next round. Nepal is unfortunately probably going to be missing out because, the gulf is just immense between Nepal and those other two teams. But when you look at the other group, that is the group of death. And this one is, interesting because, Bangladesh have some injuries. Tamim is still not fit. He won't be playing this Asia Cup. And Ibadat Hussain, he's been a good enforcer for Bangladesh with, ball in hand. Really impressive pacer, has been in form. He won't be around. Similarly, if you look at Sri Lanka, they also played the LPL at the worst possible time. You're literally inviting injuries, and now Hasaranga, your leading run scorer and leading wicket taker in the LPL, is injured, or at least for the first few games of the tournament. You've lost Dushmanta Chamira, but they probably have gotten used to that. They always lose Chamira to injury before these tournaments. And then Avishka Fernando and Kusal Pereira, they're both out with COVID. So
Mm.
both of these teams are injury hit. Afghanistan must be licking their lips. And how do you see this group of death go? Who do you see not making it to the Super 4 stage?
I think that Bangladesh is probably the best team.
Mhm.
But as you said, the injuries is awkward. But I don't think Sri Lanka is that much worse than Bangladesh as well. I think over the last 2 years, their records are actually really similar. I think
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure their win-loss records almost identical. Um, Slightly different team profiles, but I do think from that perspective, they're very, very similar. But you do have a situation where you then have this other spoiling team, as we talked about before with Afghanistan, who,
Hmm.
I'm trying to think that I think they've won about 50% of their one days in the last, or maybe just under or around that. But I don't know if they've played as many good teams
Right.
overall in that time, and perhaps when they played the better teams. But I think they have the ability to spoil either of those sides. So essentially, the Sri Lanka Bangladesh game is the most important one, right? If you win that, so is that I can't remember what the schedule is. Is that the first game that's up? Do you know who's?
No, I think the first game might be Pakistan versus Nepal.
Oh,
But
no, I
here's,
mean in Group B. In
oh,
Group B, do you know?
I can't quite recall.
Yeah.
But, you have to consider that Afghanistan have been making the Super 4 stage consistently for the last couple of
No,
years.
no, no, they have. And look, they've got a really good chance of making it again. But I suppose the point would be is we might get a really good idea of whether Bangladesh or Sri Lanka are, if we see them go really hard at each other in the game where they play,
Mm,
I think that gives you a bit of an idea of whether they are taking this tournament seriously, because it is possible that one of those teams might be like, we don't need to win this tournament.
mm,
Actually, again, let's just make sure that we're ticking when we head to the World Cup. We need to try a few things. If we make it to the semifinals, I think once the teams make it to the finals, that's different.
yeah.
If you're in the semifinal, you might play your best 11.
Mm,
And then obviously if you're in the final, you will probably play your best 11. But it would be interesting to see what those two teams go. But I think they're very evenly matched. But I do think, I've seen probably more of Bangladesh, so maybe I
mm.
favor them a little bit more. But I think they're a slightly better team all round than Sri Lanka in one-day cricket at the moment.
Yeah, it's also interesting because these teams will be playing in Pakistan, right? And then they'll be playing in Sri Lanka. So different conditions.
Yeah,
And maybe Sri Lanka misses out just because of that. Because, without Hasaranga, that bowling attack looks a lot weaker. And it's
they
going to
haven't
be very,
announced their
very
squad
different.
yet, have they?
Not yet, no.
Yeah,
And it's going to be very different in Lahore versus Colombo, right? Those are two completely different venues. So it'll be
not the
interesting
same.
to see how this plays out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess just to end this, who do you think are favorites? Some predictions, or do you not believe in those?
Well, I mean, I think it would be hard to say who the favorite is, because I don't know if there's going to be a team who's going to go all in to win it, right?
Mm,
So there's a part of me that thinks that Pakistan or Bangladesh might take it slightly more seriously than some of the other
mm,
teams, and because of that, give themselves a good chance of winning it. Um, I'd love to pick the brains of the Indian team, but I'd be shocked if they're like, we're going to play our best 11 in 3 games. Is it 3 games? 4 games. 4 games you played, don't you,
mm.
if you make the final? Um, and
Well,
so
no,
from
5 games if you play the final, right? Because you're playing 2 at the start, 6 games if you play the final.
is it? How does it?
Yeah, because okay, so let me explain this to you. You're in 2 groups, 3 teams each. You play
Yeah,
2 games in the group. Okay, then you go to the Super 4 stage. You play
and you
everyone.
played the
That's
other game.
three.
Yeah, it's a Super
Yeah.
Four. I forgot
So
about the
the
Super
super
Four. Yeah,
whoever makes it to the Super 4 stage will be playing a minimum of 5 games, and then if you play the final, that's 6. So
yeah.
that's a fair few games.
Well, that's kind of that's kind of my thing, right? I would prefer this tournament if it was 4 games from a team management point of view. 4
Mm,
games is perfect if I can get through the final. If I don't get through the final, I just make the semifinals. 3 games, fine. I can handle 3
mm.
games. Now you are talking about player management at a certain
Yeah.
point, right? And that's why I think that I do believe that Bangladesh and Pakistan will take it a little bit more seriously than India
Mm,
will. And I'm not sure about Sri Lanka, partly because they don't have a squad at the moment.
mm,
So I don't know where their head is at. But from that perspective, we don't know who's going to come out and play. So making a prediction, if you want me to make a prediction on talent, India looks like the best team in this tournament, right?
mm.
If you want me to make a prediction on what teams are actually doing, it does become a lot trickier.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because look, Pakistan have come close to winning trophies and haven't won one yet. So that might play onto Baba's
That I
mind and they
kind
might
of
just go
feel like
wonder.
they're going to go for it, right? I mean, you
Hmm.
know more about them than I do, but I kind of feel like they should know their best team. So there's no,
Yeah.
unless they're resting people just because they need to rest people, if they got a couple of niggles or whatever, there's no real reason for them not to just play their best
Hmm.
team. Whereas, as you said with India, I don't think India do know their best team. I'm not
True.
sure India know the exact, and with India, because they have so much talent, it might just be worth them chopping and changing a little bit more anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just hope that Pakistan doesn't play their best team versus Nepal because they have every chance of doing that, knowing, the past track record. But anyway, that concludes it for this episode of the Uncovered podcast. I was Beram, or I still am Beram Kazi. You can
You
find me at Def
remain.
Mango. I remain Beram Kazi. You can find me at Def Mango on Twitter, and with me was Jared Kimber. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll catch you again next week for another episode of the Uncovered podcast. That's it for now. Goodbye.
Love sports and want to write or podcast on it? Look no further than Fans with Laptops. It's a specialized course tailored for aspiring sports enthusiasts like you. Uncover the secrets of the press box, learn how to create compelling stories from scratch, and discover the best methods to share your content online. Support us on Patreon, join for exclusive perks like AMAs, live calls with me, and a vibrant Discord community. Enjoy ad-free content, early podcast episodes, and access to my emailer, plus behind-the-scenes stuff. We've built our channel on Patreon support, so a huge thanks to